In this video, I will discuss the very basics of reading a knitting pattern. If you find this video helpful, please like and consider subscribing. A knitting pattern is like an instruction manual. There are some things you need to look over before you can begin your project. My number one tip is to read the pattern completely before beginning. This will ensure that nothing will surprise you. I'll be using one of my own patterns to demonstrate. The locations of some of these items will change from pattern to pattern and from designer to designer. But these main items should be present in all patterns. Usually you will find a photo or more than one photo. And there will be some form of romance text describing the pattern. This pattern has the yarn weight symbol and the experience level symbol as well. These are from the Craft Yarn Council. These may or may not be present, but they can help tell you at a glance these two items of information. The sizes should be listed and the finished measurements corresponding to those sizes. The measurements listed will differ from item to item depending on what the garment is. You should also see the yarn that was used by the designer or a recommended yarn for use in the pattern, and how much yarn is estimated that you will need. The needles recommended to achieve gauge. Note that these are always the needles the designer used to match the gauge stated in the pattern. You may need to change needles to achieve gauge. Other materials that are needed should also be listed if you need any buttons or cable needle or any other type of notions that you may not have on hand. The gauge then should also be listed, and this should be gauge of the stitch pattern that encompasses the majority of the garment. In this pattern, for instance, there are 3 gauges listed. One for the iris moss background stitch that's present on the sides of the sweater, one for the ribbing that is present at the bottom and the cuffs, and one for the center cable chart that makes up the center panel on the front and the back of the sweater. Somewhere in the pattern, there will also be abbreviations. There may be abbreviations for everything, or, as in the case of this pattern, only the abbreviations that are not the common abbreviations. If the abbreviation list is not comprehensive, you can go to Craft Yarn Council and see a list of the standard knitting abbreviations. Somewhere in the pattern, there will also be the stitch patterns. These might be included in the main directions as you come to them, or they may be listed in an area by themselves. And you will need to refer to these as you work your pattern. Then we will have the directions. Make sure you read these directions from beginning to end so that you understand the construction of the sweater and you can make note of any at the same time directions that can be common for neckline and shoulder areas. There may or may not be some designer notes or construction notes. Make sure you pay attention to those. Sometimes you will have areas where the directions are meant for only 1 or 2 sizes, so pay attention there. It can be helpful to highlight your size when you have a list of multiple stitch counts. There should be finishing directions. These may be as simple as block and weave in all ends for a simple pattern, but more complicated patterns with seams should have that spelled out. A sweater or other garment that is to fit should always have a schematic. This will list all key measurements of the garment for all sizes. This particular pattern also has charts. The charts should be labeled with their names, and in the directions, they will refer to these charts by name. There should be a key. Ideally, there's a key on every page that a chart appears in, but you don't always see that. And these chart symbols, in this particular instance, are just labeled with their abbreviations. The abbreviation section in the pattern will explain how you achieve these stitches, but sometimes the key will also list the directions for these stitches. So that's an overview of what a knitting pattern typically has included. Again, make sure you read the pattern from start to finish. Highlight your particular stitch counts for the size that you've chosen. Make note of any interesting construction directions. Pay attention to the gauge listed and look for any at the same time directions, because those can be a big trip up for knitters. So that's a quick overview of what's in a knitting pattern and how to approach reading a knitting pattern. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.